Alright, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'een. So last time we covered Pascal's wager, right? And we wanted to drive home the point that thinking about, thinking about when we talk about trying to look at the wager in a way that's not talking about Pascal. We have to recognize that Muslims are using the wager, whether we like it or not. The second any Muslim comes with doubts, immediately what is the parent telling them? Oh, we Muslims, we live a good life. We have good ethics, we have morals, we have a family, and then you go to Jannah, you enjoy Jannah. We're using this wager. So the necessity to break it down, even though it's something from 1600 AD, becomes a reality, right? And oftentimes ideas take generations to cement itself. So if I wrote now and my idea was successful, you actually wouldn't see it now. You would see it in 100 years or 50 years to 100 years. That's really the cycle of ideas. So they come about, a philosopher writes about it, and then people have to actually deal with it, as in the masses have to deal with it, about 50 years to 100 years later. So that's why when we look at the kalam tradition in itself, and kalam means talk, means words. So basically when you read a kalam text, or a discursive theology, a rational theology text, what you're going to see is my opponent says and we say. You're going to see this back and forth. So when you, for instance, if you were to try to read Al-Ghazali's Tahafut al-Falasifa, right, the incoherence of the philosophers, or basically pointing out the incoherence of the philosophers, what Ghazali is going to do is basically say, this is what they say, this is what we say. As in, this is what Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, this is what the Islamic tradition, and of course the Islamic tradition not a monolith, but generally when we talk about Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, we're talking about the Ash'ari school of thought, or Maturidi in the minority. And of course the early pre-modern Atharis, and we'll get to all of that much later. So what I want to move into next, right, is the very basis of our epistemology. And so epistemology, right, I told you guys I was going to tell you what it is and how to remember it, right? And so basically what we're talking about is systems of knowing, theories of knowing, but two words that I really want you to remember is justified belief. Justified belief. As in, how do we know what we know? To what extent do we know what we know? And the category or the origin of knowing. So, if I were to say, right, basically if we're talking about justified belief, so we say we believe in something, well, how do you believe it? This is how I believe it. That's your epistemology. That second answer, how do you know it? How do you believe? Right? This is why I believe this. That's your epistemology. That's your theory of knowing. And alhamdulillah, in our Islamic tradition, we have a basis for knowing, right? And one of them where we're going to start is our rational judgments, which we call hukum aqli. And hukum aqli, or rational judgments, aql, hukum aqli, rational judgments, are based in three things. This is what you need to remember. What is necessary, what is possible, and what is impossible. And in theology, this is what we would call ilahiyat, right? Or basically, what is necessary for Allah, what is possible for Allah, and what is impossible for Allah. Now, in our prior thought experiment with Ibn Sina, we talked about the whole point of the experiment is to make you feel like it's impossible for you to conceive a world where a human being does not have a soul, right? So what is necessary, right? As in to say, is it necessary, let's say, for Allah to be dead? Is it necessary, right? Or is it impossible? Or rather, I don't want to confuse you guys. Is it necessary for Allah to be alive? Is it necessary for Allah to be alive?
It is.
Why?
Because that's what we know. Allah is there forever and stay here forever.
Would you be able to exist if He was not alive?
I don't think
You wouldn't.
Yeah.
Nothing would exist without the initial exister. Without the initial creator, nothing would exist. So as long as you exist, it is necessary for the initial creator to exist. And as we know, we say Allah is not only the creator, but He's the maintainer, the sustainer, right? And so His existence must subsist for anything else to exist. So we would say it's necessary that Allah is always alive. What is possible, right, is that which the mind is indifferent to its existence. And your mind, if I were to say, is it necessary for my shirt to be white? Is it necessary?
No.
No. I could be wearing a green shirt tomorrow. I could be wearing a white shirt. Doesn't, you know, your mind knows, he's wearing a white shirt today, could be wearing a green one tomorrow. It's totally possible that things can change in this realm and it doesn't matter. Your mind is not bothered by it. This is what we consider possible. And in terms of Allah's qudra, He can do it, He cannot do it, doesn't matter. Right? And then the last thing is impossible. This is probably the last thing we're going to cover for this session. That which is impossible. Right? So one of them we already covered. It's impossible for Allah to be dead. He has to be alive. But let's think about other ones. For instance, a common, philosophical question to theists they really like is, can God create a stone that's so heavy that even He cannot hold it?
Impossible.
Right. And so this is what we would consider to be like a contradiction. Because basically, that's like me asking you, can there be a circle that's also a square? Can there be? Can there be a circle that's also a square? No, something's either a circle or it's a square. Right? So when this is important, especially for people to know, because this is why Ghazali is writing Tahafut al-Falasifa, the incoherence of the philosophers, because you would be surprised at the amount of people who get tricked by this. And they start to go down all types of ideas just because they read a question saying, can He create a rock that even He cannot carry? And they go down the rabbit hole. So it's important. Why is it important, this Kalam tradition? Because it teaches you how to navigate the nonsense, right, of the people out there that are just coming up with all types of ridiculous stuff. So if you come across something, you immediately know with certainty that this is foolish. Immediately it goes under mustahil, istihala. It's impossible, right? And this is why it's very helpful, extremely helpful, that we know our rational judgments, right? We said hukum aqli, our rational judgments, and they are necessary, possible, and impossible, right? And then in theology, then it becomes necessary for Allah, possible for Allah, impossible for Allah. And a lot of people, they get uncomfortable with the impossible category because they think that it's like, oh, nothing's impossible for Allah. But this is not quite the reality. Like, this is not quite what we're talking about. So when we say, for instance, it's impossible for Him to be dead, it's not a slight on Allah's power. It's just a reality that He always has to exist, right? So we're not slighting Allah when we say that. So we have to be mature when we're talking in these terms, right? These are terms that are meant for us to have clarity in speaking about Allah. Not a slight to Allah or a slight to the Sunnah or a slight to our deen, which is our soul interacting, both spiritually and rationally with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَبَارَكَ bikum. May Allah bless you all. Thank you all for tuning in person in our majlis and online. And have, a beautiful night. We'll see you tomorrow. So.